What's up, y'all? Kevin Kuhn here from Athlete Factors. This is the Athlete Factors podcast. This is episode number 45, I believe. And my guest today is Matt Feldhake. How's it going, man?
Good. How are you doing today, man?
I'm quite well. It's a bit of a cold day here in Dallas. We got down to mid 30s actually, so which is rough because on Sunday it was just under 80. So bit of a cold front, if you will. Everybody's freaking out because that's what we do here in Texas when it gets cold. But other than that, things are going well. So
Yeah, man. That sounds like it's pretty cold for Texas.
it is. It is. I saw ice on a car when I was driving
Ooh.
earlier, so that's very uncommon. I heard it snowed in Waco either yesterday or this morning, so very, very uncommon. So, but you probably don't have to worry too much about cold weather as well, right? In
Yeah, no,
Atlanta.
it doesn't get too cold here. Some mornings it'll be down in the low 30s, but for the most part, the highs are pretty warm and not quite as warm as Dallas, but it's I think 60, 62 out right now and just pouring rain, but it's
Ooh,
not super cold, which is nice.
I'd take that over 33. But so, you're not originally from Atlanta, correct?
Correct. I am not.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and how you got into the sport of running, and just kind of catch us up on everything from your past, I guess, distant
Yeah,
past.
Yeah, man. So I'm originally from the state of Illinois, fellow Midwesterner.
Hmm.
Lived there basically my entire life until about 2015. But um, you know, going kind of back, in terms of my running career, um, I kind of got introduced to the sport right away. My dad was a high school cross country and track coach, so I've been around the sport of running basically since I was born. My mom used to work for the Arthritis Foundation and put on like local races, so I've been basically exposed to the sport from like a super young age, and that's kind of where like I found the passion for the sport was just being like fully immersed and submerged into the like the atmosphere. And yeah, I mean, I ran my first road race, a local like 3/4 mile turkey trot when I was like 4. um,
Wow.
I started running competitively on the track when I was 8, doing like AAU USATF stuff, and then it progressed into a more traditional like middle school, high school. I was fortunate enough to run collegiately, and then I've continued to train post-collegiately. So it transitioned a bit more traditionally from there. But
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, my background or experience or start in the sport is basically like as long as I can remember. So since I can remember anything, I've been basically running. So it goes back a really long ways, and um, I think part of it starting so early is like it can be detrimental. There's the risk of burnout and things like
Hmm.
that, but
Hmm.
it's been something that has just always like I've always been passionate about. So yeah, it's something that I'm thankful to still be involved in, and I'm glad that I fell in love with a sport that isn't as bad on my body as some other sports might be. So
For sure. A little less contact, let's say.
yeah, exactly. And I'm fortunate to be, genetically built to where contact sports maybe weren't the most sensible avenue for me.
Nice, nice. Yeah, that's one of those things. There, the risk of overuse injury is higher, but the risk of contact traumatic injury is much, much lower. It just doesn't really happen. So, um, there's pros and cons to every sport, but the the barrier to entry when it comes to running is relatively low. Pretty much anybody can do it. Um, all the equipment you need is, a pair of shoes, and that's pretty much it. So that's one of the really good things. So would you say that you were forced into running, or were you more encouraged into the sport?
I would say almost neither in a way. Like obviously my parents were encouraging of me pursuing the sport, but the pursuit was always mine. And I think that like goes back into why I've done it for so long is like
Hmm.
initially it was me wanting to be in the sport. And it wasn't, hey, you should sign up for this because you might be good at it. It was my dad had to travel to track meets on weekends or on weeknights, or he had cross country meets on the weekends. Like, and as a really young boy, like you want to spend time with your dad. So if you
Hmm.
can, you go and do what they do. And it was more like me just being immersed in it that I developed my own passion for
Hmm.
the activity or the sport. And like obviously my parents were encouraging throughout the whole time, but I wouldn't say like that was why I started.
Gotcha.
That it
Hmm.
was more like that helped me maybe more along the way.
Hmm. I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Just because of kind of like you said, it's not very common for people to be in a sport, essentially their entire life, if they've been forced to do it at any point, in that time. So, um, for any parents who are currently watching or listening, forcing your kids to do a sport is probably going to backfire on you at some point, and it's probably going to be sooner rather than later. So encouraging your kids to play sports is definitely recommended. Like I definitely think that that's a good idea. Sports teach so much more than just movement acuity, let's say. You learn a heck of a lot more than that. But um, yeah, I know plenty of parents who force their kids to play sports that they played, and the kid just really doesn't enjoy it. And then I know other parents who are like, "Hey, play whatever sport you want, kids." And those kids tend to do really, really well, and they stay, active for much longer. Um, so
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
props to
And
your
like,
parents, man.
thanks. And just touching on that, like I've like got to see that a lot kind of firsthand just because I started competitively in the sport at like a really, really young age. Like running my first national competition for AAU when I was like 8 or 9, that
Mm.
I've like competed against a lot of people who by the time they got into high school or college, like stopped competing. And a lot of it goes back to that. And maybe it's not necessarily like a parental issue, but it's like, it's hard to have a passion for the sport for that long, especially if it's something that you're kind of forced into.
For sure. So, speaking of forced into, we were forced to meet back a while. Let's see, it's probably around 2012, 2011, 2012, somewhere around there. So, I had already finished up my internship with Coach Harger in the Indiana Invaders professional running club in Indianapolis, but I stuck around to continue to work with the team and to I liked Indianapolis, so after my internship ended, my grad school master's degree was finished, and um, I didn't really know what else to do. And Coach Harder was like, "Hey, it's an Olympic year. Let's see what happens." So I had finished up, and then you and it was kind of a decent sized group of guys kind of came in not too long after I finished up. So tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, how we met, initial impressions, and kind of why you were working that direction towards either the coaching or working with professional runners.
Yeah, so I guess it kind of starts maybe more so with the why I was even in Indianapolis in terms of pursuing an internship. And a lot of that goes into like my educational background at the time. In 2012, I had just finished my undergrad degree in exercise science, and our program had like a heavy emphasis on human physiology and more that structure, but I at the time had just finished running in college and wanted to try and stay in the sport and pursue coaching. So,
Mm-hmm.
I pursued this internship, and that's kind of where I met you. And that like initial meeting, and I don't know if this is like actually the first time we met, but I remember like we were at that really not so great track at Crispus Attucks High School. And
Yeah.
I'm almost positive that was the first time I ever met you. And the one thing that stood out to me was like how much you actually knew about like the science behind the training, because that
Yeah.
wasn't super common in terms, and you see that a lot in coaching as a whole. Even the great coaches, some of them don't fully get the science behind like why you're doing what you're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
like that made me really appreciate like what you were doing as
Mm-hmm.
a professional at that time. With I think at that time you were more in the strength and conditioning side of things already. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciated just the like passion or knowledge of the science that you had, and that helped kind of guide me a little bit in terms of like, hey, just because you're doing an internship like with a coach doesn't mean that you can't also like take the science and begin molding your own training philosophies and stuff like that. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
I learned just as much from like our brief interactions at the time
Mm-hmm.
as I did from like helping uh, helping run practices and stuff like that with a group of basically sub elite development middle distance guys.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of how I got there. From there, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, to be honest. I learned pretty quickly that I wasn't gonna immediately pursue coaching, and went on to like get my master's degree in exercise science from the same university. So again, it was a more like physiology based program. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that coaching internship, and you had done, basically the same one that I had done, that internship as a whole really helped kind of mold me into like the professional that I am today, whether it's in coaching, whether it's in training myself, whether it's in marketing. Like that just helped me, foster a knowledge base for the sport that, I still try and kind of carry on today.
Yeah. The one thing that going into the internship with the Indiana Invaders that I really wasn't expecting was um, it was very, very unstructured. Like for me, it was supposed to be like my full time job for I don't forgot how long, 12 weeks or something like that. Like it was a big chunk of time. And upon getting there, it was like, okay, well, all the guys on the team are they all have full time jobs. They're kind of underdogs when it comes to their position as a professional runner. So nobody here has a shoe deal. Nobody here has any sponsorships. Like we help out as much as we can as a club, and we provide relatively cheap housing and training and access to um, what was that place called? NIFS, National Institute for Fitness and Sport. So
Yep.
we kind of did all of our indoor training there, and they could do weights and stuff there. But like nobody practiced, or they couldn't get all the guys to practice there at the same time, just because everybody's schedule was different. So some guys were training early in the morning, and some guys were training, midday or in the afternoon, and some guys couldn't train, till the evening. So there were huge chunks of time where I was like, okay, what do I do here, right? And if at first that kind of bothered me because I was like, man, like I'm just gonna have a lot of downtime, and like I feel like this is a waste. But um, I think that was actually a good thing because then I was able to figure out like, okay, what things do I actually want to learn here? What things do I actually want to do? What gaps do I see that can be filled And then I was proactive in addressing some of those things and saying, "Hey, Coach Harger, um, what sort of strength and conditioning program are these guys doing?" Oh, well, not really doing anything. My my time there was really spent initially. The reason I went there was because I was going to be able to help rehab um, Nate Browning, who had just ruptured his Achilles tendon. Like he was like a 46 second 400 runner, like out of University of Kentucky, and that had just happened, and I was like, sweet, this is exactly the type of thing I want to do. And so I was really there to do that. But then it was like, okay, well, now there's all these other guys that I can be working with, Ricky and Juan, and I've already had Juan on the podcast, which has been great. But all the other guys that wanted to, you know, to address all these other aspects. I was working with Nate on his nutrition and supplementation and all this other stuff. So it could have been, based off one person's perspective, a huge waste of time. And like you said, it was kind of maybe one of the big stones or one of the big starting blocks of your professional career. And that's kind of how I view it, because I was like, all right, I can do this. I can help out here. And I was helping Coach Harger out in the office doing a bunch of stuff. And I was like, what is that? Like, what are these spreadsheets? Why do you want me to do this? I didn't know, but I was just like, hey, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do whatever you need me to do. And, I think it was because of that he was like, okay, it's been 3 months. Do you want to stay? Do you want to help out for another year? So, yeah, long story short, uh, it was a pretty pivotal moment in my professional career as well, because at the time, well, coming out of college, I thought I was just going to coach cross country and track. That's all I wanted to do. And then junior year, I injured my back, and that changed everything. Like I was like, oh, okay, I need to know how to fix athletes. I need to know how to train around injuries. I need to know, how to speed up the healing process from a biochemical standpoint. And so that was essentially why I went on to grad school, to learn those things. And yeah, I didn't want to not have answers for people when they asked me, like, why are you coaching this way, or why are we training this way? And so um, makes me makes me proud to hear you say that you were at least somewhat impressed with with my brain when you guys came in, because yeah, I had too many interactions and experiences with people who were like, well, that's just the way you do it. That's not a good enough answer for me, so I'm gonna try to find the answer. So
Yeah, no, and I think that that's one of the big things is like I think that you and I think alike in a lot of ways in terms of like always asking why,
mhm.
basically. Like, and part of that is like the educational background and kind of how you're trained to think, at least from a physiology standpoint. Like that's kind of the fundamental question is, well, why does this stressor cause this adaptation? And so that was, one big thing that I always appreciated you for,
Mhm.
was you thought that same way and weren't always like just willing to accept the status quo.
Mhm.
Like in 2012, this was when like weightlifting for distance runners was like very, very uncommon still, which
Mhm.
in 2020 that probably blows my mind that we were like at a point back then. And you were actually one of the first people who kind of introduced me to the benefits of strength training for distance running and things like that. So I've always appreciated that. And then one kind of other thing to touch on in terms of what I enjoyed probably most, or one of the key takeaways from that internship as well, was like the networking component. So obviously,
Mhm.
like I met you through that internship, but they hosted the America's Miler series
Mhm.
during the summer of
Mhm.
my internship, which was in 2012. So it was an Olympic year. And
Mhm.
so I met like so many people, like my current boss. The first time I'd met him was at one of those races. And it's crazy that 5-10 years down the road, like those relationships kind of come back to you. But like the networking component of that was also like super beneficial, like and being able to talk to some really great minds in the sport, even briefly at those events, was really cool.
Yeah. The one of the interesting things is USATF is headquartered, right there in Indianapolis, and um, so there's tons of track and field people right there. There's a bunch of really good road races that are in the area. So like it just attracts a lot of people in the running industry, which is great. Um, Man, that American Miler series or whatever it was called, those meets were like they sucked having to set up for them because we had to do all of that. Like, there no one was getting paid to do it. But the cool thing is you had all these people who are trying to qualify for the U.S. Olympic trials in the 400, the 800, the mile, and the 3K steeplechase. That's all we did, right? I mean, it was basically four events, guys and girls, and it was all these super elite runners. Like looking back now, I'm like, man, like I saw some amazing races there, and you know, the meet would maybe last 2 to 3 hours because it wasn't, you know, didn't get drug out with a million different events. So
Yeah,
good
no,
times
man,
looking back.
those meets were really, really awesome. And even for the athletes, like some of those meets were the last possible opportunity for some of these people to qualify for the trials and
Hmm.
like be able to be there and experience that. Like that was really cool, you
Yeah,
know?
there was some stacked races. Like the I remember one, it was like the slowest seed time in the 800 was like 150 and like the fastest was like 145, 146. And then you've got like 12 guys who are all right there. Like on any given day, you have no idea who's going to win it. So those were exciting to watch. So,
Definitely.
um but yeah. So, let's transition a little bit away from that and transition into how you got into kind of what you're doing now with regards to ultra running.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of where it actually started. So I like after that internship, I'd gone through grad school, so on and so forth, and then I had taken like a job at a running like store, a running company, and
Hmm.
I was watching just like I was still training for road half marathons and marathons at this time. Um and I was watching like shoe reviews, and this guy, his name is the Ginger Runner. That's his like YouTube channel, but he does
Hmm.
all these shoe reviews and stuff. But then I found out like, oh, he runs like in the mountains and it's beautiful. And so like I started watching for I don't know, a year or two, and like I was living in the middle of nowhere in Illinois, like not a whole lot of like actual trail running.
Hmm.
Um stuff like that. But then, I just kind of got tired of training for the road stuff
Hmm.
after a while. Like I'd moved down to Atlanta during that time, and it's a huge running community down here, so there's events all the time, but I just kind of like got not necessarily burnt out with road running, but like I got to the point where was the juice worth the squeeze, I guess? Like what more do I have to accomplish? Like
Hmm.
when I was younger, I had won an AAU 3K title on the track, and I'd run a marathon, and I'd run, 73 minutes for a half. And I was at one point, I'd maybe been pretty close to fit enough to make the 2016 trials. And like, I wasn't enjoying like the process of like training for those kind of races anymore. And like,
Hmm.
I took like a little bit of time off after a race and just decided I didn't really want to continue to do that. And in that time, I had started like going up into the North Georgia mountains where the Appalachian Trail starts, and had been like running and hiking up there, and had
Hmm.
been running and hiking some like local trails, closer to the city of Atlanta. And it just like was more enjoyable.
Hmm.
And like to me, if I'm not going to qualify for the Olympic trials or the Olympic games, then I should probably worry about like what makes me the happiest.
Hmm.
And like I don't get paid to run, so I should probably do what makes me happy. And like that's kind of how I got into trail running.
Mm-hmm.
And then that just kind of naturally progressed. Like initially I was like pretty successful at like shorter trail stuff. And part of that came from like having a good like road and track background and having that like general level of like overall fitness. And then
Mm-hmm.
that just kind of transitioned into longer stuff. And like I guess the biggest takeaway is I just like have started to enjoy the process of training for that stuff more
Mm-hmm.
than I was at the time for road and track running. And I mean that's all it was basically. Like there's no real rhyme or reason. I just got tired of trying to run 70 minutes for a half marathon. Like 70 minutes is a good half marathon time, but it's not 64, which you need to make the trials.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, is it worth it? And yeah, I just wasn't enjoying like 2 hard efforts a week, plus a long run, plus all this high volume, plus you're working a 40-hour week job. Like,
Oh yeah.
I'd love to run, but I wasn't enjoying like that specific type of training at the
Mm-hmm.
time.
Gotcha. Because yeah, that's another thing that's getting more and more popular is these off the road races. Just because I think so many people just get burned out from just road race after road race after road race. I never enjoyed uh, racing on the roads, and like I've when I was in high school, um, the running club that I would work with during the summer and winter, um, they had a big, well, not big, they had a decent group who would go to the, Peachtree every year. So I've done, Peachtree 10K 3 or 4 times, 4th of July. It's hotter than all get out. And, you know, that's, that's
Yeah,
as
no, I
far as
mean,
I want to run on the road, man. Like I can't imagine a half marathon or a marathon. So,
yeah, and
oof.
I like just being based in Atlanta and like, and I know we'll talk on this probably a bit later, but like working for Mizuno now, who is like the official footwear and apparel sponsor for the Peachtree Road Race, like I do that race every year more as like it's a lot of fun. Like
Mhm.
that race it's like enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's hot as heck, but
Yep.
like it's fun, but like yeah, I don't have a whole lot of desire to like continue to try and train and compete at a high level on the roads. And the other thing that interests me is like trail and ultra running is still at like a fairly infant stage. Like
Hmm.
it's a lot more competitive than it was say 5 or 10 years ago,
Hmm.
but it's so much different. And it's like it's a new challenge. And can I be competitive at a high level on like this surface on these trails? And there's so many more variables that can like play into having a bad race. Like not only is it like longer distance, obviously, but the amount of time you're out there is so much longer that there's so much more that can kind of go wrong. But it's yeah, I mean the biggest thing is I wasn't enjoying the process and it's a new challenge. Like I come from, a small town in the Midwest where it's pancake flat. And so to challenge myself to climb mountains is like that like excites me, like that
Hmm.
is motivation to wake up early to get in a morning run or to like stay up late and do your core session or get in some foam rolling and stretching or it's the reason to like nail your nutrition during a hard training block. Like it was hard for me to stay like super focused even though I wasn't like super highly competitive on the roads. It was just yeah, the question like what more is there really that
Hmm.
I need to like prove.
For sure. Yeah, I imagine that right now is probably a really good time to get into the sport because it's like the wave of the kind of like crazy ultra runners who just like had absolutely no periodization, no programming, no idea of like the best way to plan and prepare for it. Those guys kind of did their thing, and now it's a whole bunch of people who've come from the sport of road racing, who've come from marathoning, half marathoning, who are like, here's how you program things out. Here's how you train. You don't just go and run a marathon every day. You want to you want it to be a little more nuanced for sure. And, not everybody has jumped into that yet. So it's probably, it's probably the golden time for someone like you who can, plan this stuff out.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's like it's a really interesting time because you're seeing like more people starting to, like you said, pick up on like actual training theory and training structure. And
Mm-hmm.
you're also seeing like probably a little bit higher ability level of people coming over. But
Mm-hmm.
then you have like really interesting like outliers in the sports, like people who don't follow traditional training structure who are super successful still. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting to see. And yeah, I mean, and there are things like outside of training structure that are super important to trail and ultra running. Like when you're on your feet that long, like I said, there are just so many more variables that come into play
Mm-hmm.
that training and how structured your training is only like a piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like in road running, it's probably more like a majority of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not the entire thing, but it's a lot of it is, what is your training like leading into a race? That's going to dictate the outcome a lot. Whereas in trail and ultra running, you could show up to the starting line super healthy and super fit, and you could still end up dropping out of the race and not finishing because there are just so many other things that play into it.
Yeah, it's crazy. I can't imagine. Just, hey, let's have a race over that mountain. Like, yeah, there's a lot more involved there, variable wise. That's for sure. So, um, so what does training look like for, you know, um, I can't even say what's a run of the mill ultra race? Is that 50 miles? Is that 50K? Is that 100? Like what's your average race, and then what does training look like for that?
Yeah, so I mean, for me personally, like I stick probably more to like challenging 50Ks or maybe even more run of the mill 50Ks, but like ultras overall these days will range anywhere from 50K to 200 miles. So there's like a lot more variability there, but um I've only run kind of 50Ks in the past. This year I'll be running my first 100K.
Mhm.
Um and that's not until October, so it gives me like a good amount of time to kind of have a pretty um, traditional progression
Mhm.
into like as far as training goes. But um, as far as like what training would look like for me going into like say a goal 50K race, it's actually going to be like pretty similar to like what marathon training would look like for someone who's trying to compete at a fairly high level at say Chicago or something like that. You're going to go through your more traditional phases where you're in more of like a base building phase, and then you're going to kind of strategically focus on the different energy systems. It's just all about like the amount of time you spend doing that work. So for
Mhm.
me personally, I'm doing like obviously a lot of aerobic work, and that's more like your easy runs. And then I'll do probably like one hard effort a week, which is typically more threshold based.
Mhm.
Sometimes it'll be, maybe a bit more like maximum velocity type work, but not super often because I try to do strides 2 or 3 times a week, which is sufficient enough for this race or like this distance to get in, the like similar benefits for like running economy and stuff like that in terms of turnover. So my structure typically is more like strength and volume based,
Mhm.
but overall you'll see people who race 100-mile races and they run 40 miles a week. They run 4 days a week, and their long run is 20 to 25 miles. And
Oh
so they're
man.
running their other 3 days, they're getting in 4 or 5 miles, and then on the weekend they're going to the mountains. But like the big thing that changes is like you have to kind of like train for the event a bit more. So a little bit of specificity in terms of like the elevation profile. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're running, say, the Chicago Marathon, you don't need to worry about like how hilly or not hilly your routes are for the most part. You need to be running on like relatively flat or rolling surfaces. If you're climbing mountains every day, that could be an issue. But
Mm-hmm.
for trail running, you have to like, you don't have to, obviously. What has seemed to work best for me is to like factor in like training elevation, like getting hill work in on your easy runs, and then structuring in hill specific workouts and things like that on top of, you're spending a lot more time on your feet. So say a normal training week when I'm training for road marathons is say 9 to 10 hours. Training for an ultra marathon, I might be spending 14 hours training a week,
Mm-hmm.
just because like you need that time on feet or that total volume in order to like kind of be somewhat successful for the most part. Obviously, you're going to have outliers, and if you're just trying to finish the race, then um, you might not need as like structured and detailed a training. But
Mm-hmm.
like I typically want to try and run like competitively as best I can based on my fitness at the time. And so I try and like kind of transition or translate the things that I've learned from road running and kind of the science behind a lot of that stuff into trail running. And you're seeing a lot of like, the better coaches in the sport doing, kind of the same thing.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to be doing a 50K trail run, doing all your running on a treadmill or around the track is probably not going to cut it. Like you've probably got to mimic that terrain as much as you can. And um, what, like, as far as the accumulated threshold running that you're doing, how much of that are you doing in a week, let's say?
I mean, it kind of depends on the week. Um, but it would be say no more than probably 15%, 10% of my total volume, probably less than that even. So like the way I tend to structure it is, so say I'm running 100 miles in a week, which would be a very high week for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still probably only going to have like one workout specific day. And so that could be like, say, a 2 mile warm up, a 10-mile tempo or an 8 mile tempo, and a 2 mile cool down, just as like a general example.
Mm-hmm.
And so the overall percentage is probably not a ton, but you're then also factoring in like you're getting some VO2 max, some very brief like anaerobic work in with strides, which is just going to improve running economy. It's not going to really do anything else for you, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not a ton of real threshold based training, to be honest. But I think over time it does kind of add up, and staying in touch with those energy systems, I think, is always beneficial.
For sure. No, I would totally agree with that. Um, it sounds to me like you're looking at, like everything has a cost to benefit ratio, and you're looking at like you've got to prioritize things. Like what's the most important thing? Well, it's to accumulate volume. It's not to accumulate speed volume. So if you're accumulating the mileage, if you're getting time, like in strength and conditioning, we often talk about time under tension. Like you've got to accumulate time doing the activity. That's going to make you better at the activity. If you're so focused on accumulating mileage at threshold, then you're not going to be able to get the volume. So um, yeah, that makes sense to me, but still putting some emphasis on it. I think that's, like you said, it's going to help with running economy. It's going to make it so that uh, if you're, here's kind of the way I think about it when it comes to improving strength, when it comes to improving speed, when it comes to improving endurance, pretty much whatever the variable is, you want to accumulate volume at whatever your goal pace or goal uh, strength number might be. Like, let's say you want to bench 400, right? I hate talking about benching, but that's probably one of the, let's say squat or deadlift. It's much better. You want to deadlift 400 pounds, okay? You've got to accumulate volume doing reps where you're working at a very, relatively speaking, at a low percentage of that, right? And then you've got to accumulate volume where you're working, closer to, let's say 85 to 90% of that. And then there's times where you've got to get close to that. You have to, if you want to be able to deadlift 400 pounds and you're only deadlifting 300 and you're doing all your work around 300, that one time you try to do 400, it's going to feel really, really difficult. Your body's just not going to be prepped for it. Your anatomical structures aren't going to be able to withstand that extra 100 pounds in force that you've got to overcome. So your tendons aren't going to like that. Your ligaments really aren't going to like that. Even if your muscles are strong enough to do it, the rest of the structures just aren't prepared. So if you want to be able to withstand a 50K, you're doing yourself a favor by training faster than, the speed that you'll be racing that 50K in. So just makes sense to me. Like, whatever the distance that you're running is and the pace that you're goal timed or that you're preparing for, like, getting some training in that's faster than your goal pace, get some training in that's at your goal pace. And for something like the endurance events, you're going to have to accumulate a lot of volume slower than your goal pace, just because you've got to build those aerobic processes, the enzymes to utilize the aerobic system more effectively, the catalysts, you want to build up your mitochondrial content and concentration. So there's a whole lot going into training, more so than just, go run.
Yeah. And one of the really interesting things about like mountain running and ultra running as a whole is you use, like, yes, the event is, say, 99% aerobic. It might actually be less than that in a lot of ways, because as you're, say, climbing a mountain, you may be in like a lactate threshold phase based on your heart rate and how hard you're working, even though you're going like super slow or like slowish. It's like I've always found that like super interesting, that when you're climbing a mountain, you may not be going very fast, but you may be working so hard to move your frame up this mountain that you kind of have to do some threshold training. Otherwise, you're going to make it 1 mile on a 4-mile climb and you're going to sit down on the side of the trail. And like, I've been there. When I first moved into the sport, I thought I'm faster than everyone else because I'm fresh off, like, crushing it on the roads or running well on the roads. Like, this will be nothing. But there's like a lot more to it, which is part of what like makes it interesting. And then like, obviously going back to kind of the overspeed type stuff, like I think strides are super beneficial and overspeed training is super beneficial for almost everyone. Like, I was reading an article or a research, I don't remember if it was peer reviewed or not, but it's like basically sprinting is one of the best ways to improve range of motion. And like, you never really think of it. You always think like, oh, do dynamic stretching, dynamic drills, things like that. Well, sprinting is that. And so that's actually probably one of the main reasons that I use like strides as frequently as I do, which is maybe more often than a lot of people in the ultra running space, is because it helps me kind of maintain a good range of motion in kind of the hips, the hamstrings, glutes, things like that. So yeah.
Distance running is by nature, it's sub-maximal with regards to intensity and effort, and it's also very, very much sub-maximal with regards to range of motion, to full hip flexion, full hip extension. You just the goal is to be as efficient as possible when you're moving for that long, and so the body will kind of sink you into a range where it's like, hey, we can get the most out of the most bang for our buck, calorie wise and neurologically, neurological demand wise if we stick things here. But yeah, so all that to say, uh, define what you mean by strides. Like explain what that entails, because everybody talks about strides. Is that like is that working up to a full sprint? Is that focusing on high quality sprint mechanics and just working up to, you know, just under what you could, you know, muscle out as much as you could? Or are you like, what does that mean? Because for a lot of people, strides can mean just, you know, mile race pace. For some people, it's just you're not even worried about your speed. You're just building up to you know, just you're gonna do 100 meters and just build up and then slow down. Like what does wow, what does stride mean to you?
Yeah, so that's a really good question because it can mean just about anything to anyone. So the way like I like to structure my strides is in probably two different ways, although sometimes I do use like a third way. But one of the kind of two ways that I alternate is basically something like 8 by 10 seconds, pretty close to all out. Um, Obviously, that's taking into account you don't want to get hurt, things like that. So it's not 100% maximum velocity, but like it's a controlled hard effort.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the main ways, because I think as like distance runners, and the further you go up in distance, the less like real hard running you traditionally do. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's super important. And so I try and do, and it may be say 8 by 6 seconds, 8 by 10 seconds. If I'm on a track, it might be say 8 by 50 meters, something like that, where it's like I want to go really hard without injuring myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's like one of the predominant ways I do it. The other way is something like, say, 6 by 150 meter buildup. So the first 50 meters might be at, say, mile pace. The second 50 meters might be at half mile pace or 800 pace. And then the last 50 is, again, pretty close to all out without risking injury.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I don't know what those would typically be in seconds. I typically don't do those as often, probably.
Mm-hmm.
But then the third way that I will occasionally do strides, and I don't do it very often, is say 4 by 200 at basically just mile pace,
Mm-hmm.
um, with like full recovery. And so that would be something like maybe the day before a workout could be good, to where you're just getting a little bit of turnover without like really, really having to work, or maybe you're feeling a little bit of sore and you know you need to like you need to do strides, but maybe you're just not recovered from a long run or a workout or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
That was the form of strides that we probably did the most when I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
Was 4 by 200 at probably closer to 800 pace.
Mm-hmm.
But now I probably prefer, and a lot of it's like just the way that I use them in my overall training structure, to do just shorter, like harder efforts. Um, Whether it's 8 by 60 or 50 meters or 6 by 150, something like that. I typically like the volume per session to be around 800 meters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's no real probably rhyme or reason to it. It's just kind of overall preference. So if I do that 3 times a week, I'm getting in a mile and a half of like real hard effort
Yeah.
training. And if I'm running 50 miles a week, that's 3% of my training. If I'm running 100 miles a week, it's 1.5%. But like it's good to just occasionally spend a little bit of time working really hard, because it's good for you. And there are times like in a trail race where you need to be able to turn over your legs really, really fast, whether you're mostly when you're running basically downhill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't want to end up rolling down the hill, I'm sure. So
Yeah.
being able to pick your feet up and put them down quickly is probably a useful tool to have in your toolbox. So awesome. Well, talking about elevation, this is perfect segue. So tell us what you're doing right now with your Steep Life Challenge.
Yeah, so the Steep Life Challenge is basically just something I made up to challenge myself, in all honesty. But it kind of stems from a YouTube channel that I followed when I was new to the sport and still follow today, called Run Steep, Get High. And obviously, it's a really funny play on words there. But they host a lot of trail races out in the Phoenix area, and the owner of the YouTube channel and owner of the company is he does basically a lot of like crazy challenging races, and his channel all started with him needing to train for this race, and he wanted to run like something crazy, like, sorry if I just went away there.
Yep,
He
you're
wanted
back.
to run sorry he wanted to run some crazy amount of elevation in a 4-week period, like 100,000 feet of vertical gain in
Oh
four
my.
weeks, which is insane. It's crazy. And so I've been like probably in the last 3 months, like maybe, well, no, I mean, all last year I had basically a pretty garbage week training wise. Like my wife and I had our first kid. I took a new job. We moved into a house, like a lot going on. And that, like, there's only 24 hours in a day. So you have to kind of pull from maybe less valuable places at the time. And that meant not being able to train as hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so over the last maybe probably since December, I've been, struggling with, like, I felt motivated to run, but nothing really like interest me to run, if that makes sense. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do it, but the act of doing it wasn't like super easy. It wasn't like, oh, let me go. I don't live near trails anymore. So it was like, let me go trot around the like roads of this Atlanta suburb. And like, that wasn't super fun. So, um, about a week ago, I was watching some old YouTube videos and was like, you know, I should do this. The ginger runner who I talked about before, he had done his first 100-mile week at the end of last year. And this Run Steep Get High channel started, doing their YouTube videos again. And like the kind of underlying message that I was taking was like, ah, like, what is your 100-mile week? Like, I've run 100 miles in a week before quite often. Like, I didn't want to do that, but like, what was something that was going to challenge me and was going to be the reason that I got out of bed early in the morning and the reason I would go run really late at night? And basically, I looked at like, what challenges me? Why do I want to continue running? And that was to be a better trail runner, so on and so forth. And so I basically created this challenge with an homage to the Run Steep Get High channel that is the Steep Life Challenge. And I'm posting videos on it about once a week that kind of documents this journey. But my goal is in the month of February to run 50,000 feet of vertical gain. And to put that in perspective, because for some people that's not that much, and for some people that's sounds like a crazy amount. For me, that's a lot. Like, prior to this, my highest vertical week or month was 25,000 feet. And that was when I was like peaking for an ultra marathon in 2016. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, I just don't run that much vertical.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to do it. Like, it's scary, it's challenging. I don't know that my like body is physically strong enough to carry me that much vertical feet day after day and not get injured. Like, I don't know if I can even do it, but
Yeah.
I'm going to try, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And at the very least, I'm going to like learn things about myself that I didn't know before. And that's like one of the beauties of ultra running is, like, you're going to go to the shittiest places you've ever put yourself in before in your life. Like, my first ultra, I was like I was having stomach issues at like mile 20. And it got to the point where I thought to myself, I still have 5 miles to go after I've run 26 miles. I don't know if I can do it.
Mm.
And like, you put yourself in these positions, and to be able to like do that with the training aspect of things, I think is like super, super exciting for me. And like, like I said, it's going to be hard. I'm going to document it, whether I am successful or fail. Like I'm, I'm going to do it. I'm going to run 50,000 feet this month. It may just hurt a lot, but like I'm going to get it done, and it's going to be a challenge, and I'm going to suffer. But like that's what I signed up for. That's like why I got into running when I was younger. That's why I continue to do it, is to like learn a little bit more about yourself when you're like everything is stripped away. It's just you and moving forward. That's when you learn a lot about like the type of person that you are. And hopefully whatever I learn helps me like move forward as a professional, as a runner, as a father, as a husband. Like that's basically why I want to do it, is like how far can I push myself and still pull myself out the other side. And so yeah, that's what we're doing over Christmas. My wife and I also got a like Nordic track treadmill. So it adjusts incline up to 40%. So because I don't live like super close to trails, a lot of my time will likely be on the treadmill during the week, just because I've got a 9-month-old daughter. I've got work, like I've got a lot going on. And so making sure I'm able to balance those things and those obligations and still get in my training, is going to be critical. So that's kind of what that is. I'll be documenting it on my YouTube channel, which is Trail Runner Adventures. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And the reason I chose to do it like right now when I'm not super fit is like it made sense in my overall like 2020 training block to like do something right now. So later in March, I'll be pacing one of my friends for like the last 25 miles or so of the Georgia Death Race. And it's a really hard race, and it's gonna
Really?
be
Doesn't sound
brutal.
like
Yeah.
it.
And
Death race.
and so because I'm not super fit, I wanted to use basically this 4-week time frame to like really force myself to improve overall fitness, but also get physically stronger. Like that's one of the interesting things about trail running, is like you see a lot of people who maybe don't look like traditional runners, or who don't run a lot, but they're like physically strong people. And sometimes that's like just as beneficial as being like aerobically very fit, because carrying your body weight up a, say, 5,000 foot mountain is very hard. And it takes like a certain level of strength. And that's basically like why I want to do this vertical challenge as well, is like I don't have time to run and do a lot of gym work. And so it's my way of trying to incorporate maybe a little bit more functional strength training into my training program. And obviously it's not the most ideal, as you would probably tell me from a strength and conditioning background, but I'm working with what I have. And yeah, I hope my body holds up, but one way or another, we're gonna kind of see what we're made of. So
That's cool.
It's gonna be hard, but it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, if you're not setting challenges for yourself, like you said, it's a good time for you to do that. Like in the middle of your racing season, this would not work out. But, right now at this time, this gets you rolling out of bed, motivated to put in some serious training, and that's always a good thing. And I'm sure there's going to be days where you absolutely, regret it, but you know, you've set the standard, you've set the goal, you've put it out there to make sure that you're staying accountable, and I think that's a good thing, man.
Yeah,
You
man, I
gotta
hit
gotta go
publish on the
for it.
YouTube video. So once you hit publish on the YouTube video saying you're gonna do something,
It's real.
you sure as shit better do it,
Can't back out now, man.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
it's live. It's everywhere.
Exactly.
That's good. No, that's a good thing to continue to set goals like that. That's really important because most people kind of tend to get into a rut or a pattern where they're just doing the same thing over and over and over again, and then you end up getting, stale or bored, and you look for something else to do, or you know, pick up eating as a sport, and then then it gets really hard to go run. So
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to like find whatever your challenge is in whatever you want to do, right? Like it doesn't
Mhm.
have to be trail and ultra running. It doesn't have to be running. Like it doesn't have to be exercise. Like what is your challenge at work? What is your
Mm.
challenge that's going to make you a better husband or whatever the case may be? Like that was the message I took away from like all this content I was absorbing during this time frame was like, oh, these people are challenging themselves in like ways that maybe aren't applicable to me, but like what can I do to like challenge myself and to push me to be a better like runner and a better person. And like yeah, I think that that's super important. Like complacency is like basically the enemy of success in a
Mm.
lot of ways, and you can define success in whatever way you want, but if you're complacent, there's a good chance that you're not going to kind of see success or be successful. Like they just are on a scale, and if one's going up, the other's going down for the most part.
Hmm. No, I would totally agree with that. As soon as you get lazy, uh, things tend to fall apart. Your success tends to go downhill. So sweet. Well, how can people follow you aside from your YouTube page?
Yeah, so let's see. The only other kind of social channel that I'm like fairly active on would be Instagram, and that's just MJ Feldhake, Feldhake. Um, that's my Instagram handle. My YouTube channel has an Instagram handle as well, but I don't post as frequently probably on that. So, um, yeah, if you want to learn more about me as a person and see cute baby photos, yeah, Instagram's the place for it.
Nice. All right, man. So, if you could give everybody one piece of advice, or if you wanted to share a quote, or if there's something important for you to tell everybody, what would that be?
Man, that's a good one. If I could share one piece of advice. So actually, here, I saw this on Instagram the other day, and it actually stayed with me, and I think it's somewhat relevant here, but it was just a photo with the words "no pressure, no diamonds."
Mm,
And like that stuck with me, and it may sound stupid to a lot of people, but like it basically means like to me, it means like be willing to put yourself in uncomfortable situations from like a how much you're doing and things like that. Like be willing to get uncomfortable in order to get better. And um, you know, it ties straight back into like the whole complacency and laziness issue. Like, yeah, no pressure, no diamonds. If I can leave you with one parting thought, that would be it.
yeah, that's simple words, but they carry a really profound message, and it, you can spend some serious time thinking about that, and it's more than just surface level stuff. Like that's pretty deep. I like it. So, alrighty, man. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. Good luck with getting that 50,000 feet of vertical elevation gain. That's gonna be brutal, man. I mean, but you know what? If somebody sees you do it, then that's probably gonna motivate them to give it a try too. So
Yeah, I
thanks.
mean,
Thanks for doing
hopefully
that.
it hopefully it motivates more people than the amount of people that think I'm an idiot. So that's all I can hope for.
Awesome. Alrighty, y'all. Well, thank you so much for watching and listening. Go follow Matt right now. And yeah, stay tuned for our episode next week. Adios.